Wake up, South Florida. The alarm is ringing. Hurricane season is here, and there's no turning back. What kind of season will it be? What's in store for South Florida? And are you and your family prepared? So join us now as we sort the facts from the myths to make sure we're all staying storm safe.
Hi, I'm Local 10's Chief Certified Meteorologist Betty Davis alongside our hurricane specialist Max Mayfield. Welcome to Staying Storm Safe, our 2017 hurricane special. Here's what we have coming up for you over the next hour as we get you ready for hurricane season. What can we expect over the next 6 months? We talk to the experts at the National Hurricane Center and check out the new tools they are using to forecast tropical systems. Also, we discuss the #1 danger for all of South Florida if a storm strikes. And we'll take a look back 25 years ago to Hurricane Andrew, a moment in time that no one will ever forget. Max, most people want to know, what will the season bring? What do the predictions tell us?
Most people are saying that it's going to be about an average season number-wise, but it's just not all about the numbers.
And if you're looking for the forecasters at the National Hurricane Center to talk about the numbers, the predictions, you may want to look elsewhere. Every year during hurricane season, most of us have one eye on our regular lives and the other on what's happening out in the Atlantic. The smallest rainstorm off the coast of Africa is enough to create a very large pit in the bottom of our stomachs, and unfortunately, this season will bring much of the same.
Every year, we have many storms out in the Atlantic, and the National Hurricane Center will be busy. You folks will be busy tracking them, just as we are. But of course, what counts is what happens here.
Like all of us, Ed Rappaport is on the lookout because as acting director of the National Hurricane Center, he too is a South Florida resident and one who doesn't put much into seasonal predictions.
Our concern, of course, is what's going to happen in South Florida, and the seasonal forecast doesn't tell us that. The problem is we just don't know, and we can't tell from the seasonal forecast. They have not advanced enough yet to tell us which areas and when are going to be affected by the storm.
Forecast track and intensity forecasts. Where are we with those two things in terms of accuracy?
Since Max and I arrived, we've made tremendous improvements, tremendous strides in track forecasting. Intensity forecasts are improving as well, but just not at that same rate. And in particular, those storms that go through what we call rapid intensification, where they increase by a category or two in 24 hours, are still tough to forecast.
However, new tools at the Hurricane Center will allow forecasters to give more detailed warnings to residents based specifically on location. Beginning this season, for the first time ever, forecasts will be split into two, with some warnings and watches focused squarely on winds.
This year, if we need to, we can issue advisories before the storm even forms if we think there's a risk within the next day or two to land.
And others solely for storm surge.
So we'll be able to highlight just the areas where we think there will be a risk of this life-threatening storm surge. We're trying to separate now the information to make it relevant to each hazard. There'll be different information for wind potentially than there will be for storm surge. And if you're in a zone where there's a storm surge watch or warning, you really need to prepare for that as the greatest risk for loss of life.
And there's another tool we should mention, Max.
We typically see this cone graphic. Well, that only shows us the potential track of the center of the tropical cyclone. It doesn't show how far out the impacts can extend from the cone. This year, the Hurricane Center is going to show us that initial wind field so we can see how far out these strong winds extend from the center.
I'm sure that's going to be very useful for us. Now, throughout the show, meteorologist Julie Durda will be joining us. She will have tips for you and your family to help you stay storm safe. And we want you to log on to local10.com and download the Hurricane Survival Guide.
Coming up on Local 10, Staying Storm Safe. While the rest of us take shelter, we'll introduce you to the brave crew that rushes straight into the eye of the storm.
I don't think anybody was prepared for what we saw that next day.
And it was a moment in time we'll never forget. On the 25th anniversary, we take a look back through the eyes of those who covered it all at Local 10.
When a tropical storm or hurricane sets its sights on South Florida, don't wait to prepare your home for a possible strike. If you have shutters, put them up 24 to 36 hours before the storm is scheduled to arrive. You don't want to be outside when the winds are starting to pick up. Make sure your home is completely secure, and don't forget those outside items like lawn furniture, garbage cans, and anything else that could become airborne in high winds. And finally, have cash handy, as those ATMs may go down, and stock up on batteries and flashlights. Of course, for plenty more prep tips, download the Local 10 Hurricane Survival Guide right now on local10.com.
Welcome back to Local 10's Hurricane Special, Staying Storm Safe. The winds get the headlines.
But the most dangerous hazard of the hurricane is the storm surge.
Not a lot in Hurricane Andrew, but as our Julie Durda tells us, storm surge could be devastating to South Florida.
That's right, Betty, Max in South Florida. Every time we think of hurricanes or tropical storms, the strong winds are the first thing that come to mind. But if you want to stay safe during the season, there's a much bigger danger that we all need to be aware of. When a tropical system hits the mainland, it's the strong winds that grab the headlines.
Hurricanes are probably the biggest threat that South Florida faces.
But the true danger and the real killer of any hurricane is the storm surge, the massive wall of water that is pushed ashore, flooding coastal and inland areas in the strike zone.
Run from the water, hide from the wind.
Many of our homes now are going to be hardened against the types of winds that we will get in a hurricane. But there is no way to harden against a storm surge. That's what's going to kill people.
Throughout U.S. history, storm surge alone has killed thousands of citizens and caused billions of dollars in damage. And sorry, but if you thought you saw the worst of the storm surge during Andrew, think again.
Andrew was a small, compact storm, and though we saw 15, 16 feet of surge around Biscayne Bay, certainly, the stories of, or the actual events of things like the Burger King Corporation building and the impact of surge there, it didn't come way inland like is possible with some of these events.
The storm that you have been through is not the worst one that can hit the state of Florida.
Hurricane warning here is right along the coastline. We don't have too much inundation going too far, but these areas along the coast could potentially be evacuated.
Brian Zachary is a storm surge specialist at the National Hurricane Center. He's part of the team that develops the storm surge forecasts that are then used to issue watches and warnings.
This is the worst case possible with a Category 5 storm. This is making landfall at maybe 10,000 different Category 5 storms and taking that worst storm surge footprint. Red is greater than 9 feet above ground, so most of this area, the Everglades, Miami South, are all above, going to be flooded by 9 feet or more of water.
If you're wondering how the storm surge makes it so far inland, remember all the waterways that weave in and out of our community.
Some of these canals, the Miami River, the Little River, and at some point, it'll overflow and reach into some of these other, inland communities.
Storm surge is a big threat. Warning residents about its danger is priority number 1 for South Florida emergency managers.
Our evacuation zones, we've changed the naming to storm surge planning zones because we want people to understand, again, it's tied to storm surge. We want them to be educated on whether they live in one of these zones, and we've developed tools so they can understand the level of water over land that can possibly be for some of these storms.
You can easily access those tools by logging on to your county's emergency management website. But be smart when it comes to the actual warnings and threats of high water levels. And never underestimate the perils of storm surge.
Think about it for a second. Once you start going above here and above here, I don't care how much deeper it goes, we're talking about your life.
It's critical to know in advance if you live in one of these storm surge evacuation zones.
And you can find out more by logging on to local10.com. Computers and satellites give us insight into a storm.
But there's nothing like having human eyes inside the storm.
Jennifer Correa met up with a brave crew of hurricane hunters.
Max and Betty, the men and women of the Air Force are known for their bravery during peacetime and war, but a very special crew goes above and beyond when it comes to battling storms. You just heard Julie mention that you want to run from the water and hide from the wind when it comes to hurricanes. But there's a group of scientists that do the complete opposite. The brave men and women that make up the Hurricane Hunter crews don't back down from danger. In fact, they fly right into it.
And our job is to go find where that low pressure is and collect data all around the low and find out if there's a center of circulation. And if there is, we'll confirm that with the hurricane forecasters.
There's the eye right there. See the round circles?
No matter how strong the storm, for over 7 decades, hurricane hunters have taken flight to gain insights that can't be acquired any other way. What's the highest that it could probably withstand?
We fly it into everything up to a Cat 5 storm. So, you know, anything from like 180 knots, 220 knots of wind.
The data we collect has been shown to improve forecasts by about 25%.
They do it all aboard massive C-130s like the one we were lucky enough to tour with the crew itself.
Inside, it's just like any other normal C-130. We've got seats for crew members to sit in, or paratroopers. We can drop people out of these windows. Would you like to do that? Up here toward the front is really where all the action happens for the missions. We've got on the right side here, we've got a dropson tube, and then on the left-hand side is where the meteorologists sit. So the dropson will go in this tube here.
Very cool.
And then this will close, and then that will be released into the storm, and it just falls out of the airplane, more or less. The parachute here, we want it to fall slowly so it has a chance to send the data back to the airplane, and also so it controls it so it doesn't malfunction.
Now, is this dropped at the center once you find that center, or you can actually drop it anywhere in the
Anywhere
system?
in the storm that we want to.
Okay.
We may drop a couple on the way out to make sure everything's the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
And then we'll drop one, always drop one in the eye, and we'll always drop one in the center of the eye of the storm. So this is where that dropson operator will sit, here at this station. And then I sit over here at this station, and we've got a little keyboard here that pulls out, and this is where I do my job.
This is where the pilot sits on the left seat, co-pilot on the right seat. And what you're seeing here is the cockpit of the U.S. Air Force Hurricane Hunter. As you can see, a C-130 is no luxury plane, and a flight is an experience that is not for everyone. How does it feel?
It is. It is a interesting experience. It's definitely not for everybody, and certainly not for anybody that's afraid of flying. It's kind of, a lot of guys equate it to being like being in the inside of a washing machine. We had Geraldo Rivera fly with us years and years ago. And I remember the stories guys saying when he got off the plane, he went and kissed the ground when he landed, so.
But if you got an iron stomach, the front row seat to Mother Nature's fury makes the bumpy ride worth it.
You always have to remember they're incredibly destructive, but they can also be incredibly beautiful. And being in the middle of a Category 5 eye, looking around at towering walls of thunderstorms surrounding you with lightning flashing through them, and you look up and there are so very few people on Earth who ever get to experience this. And I'm so lucky to have been one of them.
Wow, flying into a hurricane, just an out-of-this-world experience.
I remember flying into the eye of Hurricane Elena in 1985 8 or 9 times, and I can assure you that we should never take these men and women for granted.
A lot more coming up.
Straight ahead.
I had never been through anything like this at all.
Hurricane Andrew changed the course of South Florida forever. Now, 25 years later,
I was not prepared at all for what was coming.
Those who reported from the devastation shared their stories of sadness and survival. Plus, was Andrew the worst that Mother Nature can throw at us? See what could happen if a nightmare storm actually strikes when Local 10's Staying Storm Safe returns.
To stay safe, the most important thing is to be prepared with the proper supplies. And number one on the list is water and food. You've heard it before, but make sure you're ready with 1 gallon of water per person for at least 3 to 7 days. And remember, without electricity, you won't be able to use an oven or stove, so packaged canned food handy for up to a week. Finally, before a storm strikes, fill coolers with ice to preserve any food that could go bad without refrigeration. It sounds like a lot, I know, but staying safe is easy if you are prepared.
Welcome back. 25 years ago this summer, Hurricane Andrew became only the 3rd Category 5 hurricane to ever hit the United States.
And in doing so, changed South Florida forever.
We didn't know what was coming.
It was a tropical wave that came off the coast of Africa on the 14th of August.
Here's where it was Monday out in the middle of the Atlantic. It has taken more or less a straight line course, except today it jogged just a little bit up to the north here.
It didn't look any different than, your average tropical wave.
Good evening. Right now, Andrew's a tropical storm, but by tomorrow, he might well be a hurricane.
And I'll never forget, I went home after midnight and told my wife, I started this, I advised us on this disturbance that eventually became Andrew. And I said, I sure hope it doesn't fall apart or I'll look stupid.
Good evening. Hurricane Andrew continues to move toward the west near 15 miles per hour. That means hurricane warnings are now in effect for the northwest Bahamas, and a hurricane watch is in effect for the South Florida coast.
Even though in the media we would spend our time telling everybody, prepare, it's coming, this is serious, in the back of our minds, we really weren't even taking it that seriously.
I had never been through anything like this at all, not even close.
We were facing something profound and serious and threatening.
I was not prepared at all for what was coming.
All stores must close. Emergency evacuation is in effect.
It looks like people here are taking the threat of Hurricane Andrew seriously.
The night before the storm, they actually sent our main anchors home.
Good evening. Tonight, Eyewitness News is tracking Hurricane Andrew, and we are going to...
Initially, believe it or not, I was excited. But as it drew nearer, I realized the gravity of the situation.
Hurricane watch.
Everyone is coming.
In a 36-hour period, it went from a tropical storm to a Category 5 hurricane.
They were deadly serious all of a sudden.
Here, the hurricane watch as outlined on the map. It runs from Titusville down the east coast, all the way through the Keys and through the Dry Tortugas. That obviously includes all of South Florida.
It was pretty apparent to me and everybody that we were in for something really devastating.
They sent myself and Todd Tungan with a photographer and an engineer out in a Ryder truck.
At first, it wasn't that bad.
And the thing was moving like we were on a roller coaster.
I was on the air, and we had told them this is our last hit. We are going for shelter, and we can't broadcast in this truck any longer.
We found out after the storm that that Ryder truck was upside down and on top of a roof.
And at one point, the van was perpendicular to the ocean, and I opened up the door of the car, and the thing almost blew right off the hinges.
I went back about 3 o'clock in the morning to try to, take a little nap, and just as I started to doze off. A window blew off in the adjoining room, and I said, gee, that's not supposed to happen.
We got any more flashlights we can shine on this?
The Channel 10 tower came down at the television station, and so we were knocked off the air.
I know the analogy is worn and cliched like a freight train. It was like a freight train coming right past your head, and it just kind of overwhelmed the senses.
It wasn't until we got to the hurricane shelter and we were in very safe space and you could feel the walls moving in and out with the drop of barometric pressure that I thought, oh my God, what's happening here?
I tried to call my home and couldn't get through, and I actually had one of the people there at the Hurricane Center try to call every 30 minutes, and they couldn't get through. But you know, we were so busy, I just couldn't take time to worry too much about that. About
4:30 in the morning, I was able to call my husband, and as I was on the phone with him, I heard this almighty crash. And he said to me, I can't talk to you now. A tree just came through the dining room, and the phone went dead.
I lost the radar. That we had these two big antenna dishes for the geostationary satellites, and they were just shredded.
So my news director said to me, you can't go home yet. You have to go to the county line. We have a tower there. You're going to start broadcasting live from that tower. You're the only person who can put us on the air right now because everything where we are in downtown Miami is gone.
The fact that we had not heard from Homestead or the Redland area was not a good sign. We knew it was bad before the sun even came up.
I mean, I don't think anybody, even though we knew it was a very strong storm and that it was going to hit, I don't think anybody was prepared for what we saw that next day.
And I could not believe my eyes.
When the sun rose, no one was prepared for what Andrew left in its wake.
It was like the whole area had been carpet bombed.
A community sinks to new lows before rising again when we return to Local 10's Staying Storm Safe.
In the case of a severe storm, roads may be closed, so first aid supplies are essential. Make sure your first aid kit is updated and refreshed with necessities such as sterile bandages and sunscreen. If you take medication, have your prescription filled to last at least 2 weeks. Have plenty of mosquito repellent to keep the critters away when you're working outside. Remember, check out Local 10 Hurricane Survival Guide for a complete list of all the supplies right now on local10.com.
Even though we knew it was a very strong storm, I don't think anybody was prepared for what we saw that next day.
It was absolutely devastating. Tiling from the roof, glass plating from the cars. You can barely see the front path. I had never, ever seen such devastation before.
If you've ever been skeptical as to whether a mobile home is a safe place to be in a hurricane, this should prove it to you. There's literally nothing left to this home.
And the further south we drove, the worse it got.
They survived Hurricane Andrew. Now they're trying to survive the elements.
And I could not believe my eyes. It was as if the hand of God had come down and done this to the South Florida landscape.
You're dealing with them and they're dealing with you. Meanwhile, there are people standing out in the field who need a drink of water.
There's something to be said for the kind of shock that you feel. It's a trauma.
It was like the whole area had been carpet bombed.
I've been embedded with troops in wars in the Middle East, but I have never seen such devastation.
We were without water. We were without electricity. There was no security. It was like living in a war zone.
Everywhere you went, there were stories.
I saw a building that people had gotten up onto the roof and painted onto the roof, "We need food."
Centro Villas, just outside Florida City, is devastated. They need food. They painted this on their roof to attract some sort of attention because they haven't seen any relief trucks this far south.
There were times when you had to stop rolling, you know, and just say, "Look, guys, can we just get a minute? You know, we'll get the story, but there's something bigger going on here. You know, these are people that live in my community. They're without a home. They've lost almost everything."
Hey. I'm waiting for a looter. If I see somebody come in that house, he's a dead man.
South Miami-Dade, for a number of days, was the Wild West.
There was looting. I saw that. I mean, it was the Wild West. There was lawlessness in some areas.
The fear for property is real, as we saw in a nearby shopping area. The National Guard moved in.
You would walk down the street and there were soldiers carrying weapons. You couldn't believe this was happening in your hometown.
You stealing TVs and stuff like that, and telephones?
Miami-Dade police did the best they could, but they were overwhelmed too.
I saw people sitting on their front porch with the shotgun. I saw neighbors putting up signs saying, "Don't even think about it."
Everything was just wiped out. And it's real bad down here. We really need a lot of help.
We need all the help we can get.
We're doing everything we can. Where in the hell is the cavalry on this one?
When Kate Hale said, "Where's the cavalry?" it summed up in a phrase what everybody in this community who was hurting was feeling. Where is Washington? Where is the help we deserve?
They're blowing the horn and no one's coming.
At least 7,000 federal troops are on station or en route to deliver services to Floridians who are the victims of this horrible disaster.
And I want you to form an orderly line right where the National Guard is.
Correct me, I'm hungry.
While yes, I think of Hurricane Andrew as one of the worst events I ever lived through and my community ever lived through, I'm so proud of the way that our neighbors here in South Florida responded to it.
We're getting tired of sleeping like we're sleeping, but we thank you all so much.
As difficult as it was, there were moments of generosity and kindness and community.
It was only in covering Hurricane Andrew that I realized how fragile my own existence is and how fragile it is for all those that we covered and who that storm touched.
And it's almost ironic. A Miami fixture took a beating from Andrew. Yes, the Coppertone girl lost her head.
I remember driving, this was like 2 weeks later, after I finally was able to get back into my home, driving home and weeping.
The first few years after Andrew, when we ran stories, I couldn't look at the video because I wouldn't be able to continue to talk or read without having some kind of break from emotion in my voice.
Undoubtedly, a lot of it was just seat of your pants, and you just had to rely on your instincts. Andrew made me a better reporter.
Even all this time later, 25 years later, I look at those pictures and I could start to cry.
Hurricane Andrew and Andrew-related stories were the lead story on Channel 10 for 2 months. That says a lot about just how big of an impact this storm had on South Florida.
And Max, all these years later, the memories are just so raw for so many.
One of the huge lessons learned is how important building is. And I remember 2 developments side by side. One of them was damaged tremendously. The other one only had minimal damage. The only difference is in how they were built.
We'll be right back.
This is not a place you want to be if storm surge is coming.
When Staying Storm Safe returns, if you think Andrew was the worst Mother Nature can throw at South Florida, think again. We'll show you the worst case scenario after the break.
One of the most important decisions you will need to make if a storm threatens is whether you'll evacuate. Take a look at Local 10 Hurricane Survival Guide to see if your home is in an evacuation zone. There's a simple map that will give you the answer. Next, know ahead of time where you and your family will go if a call to evacuate is made. Will you stay with your family or go to a shelter? And finally, if you do plan on heading to a shelter, make sure you know where they're located. All the information is easy to find in the Local 10 Hurricane Survival Guide on local10.com.
Welcome back to Staying Storm Safe.
We mentioned the dangers of storm surge earlier.
And we wondered if anyone out there has ever really considered what a major storm surge event would do to the Keys. It would have devastating effects.
Hallandale Beach, all of these areas can be soaked this morning.
But by the weekend, from the southeast, riding along that strong wind.
For decades, we have preached to prepare for the worst and hope for the best when it comes to storm safety.
If we live in South Florida, we should never be surprised by a hurricane.
But what happens when hope fails and the worst becomes reality? For the Florida Keys, a direct hit from a Category 5 hurricane would be a catastrophic event, something not seen since 1935.
If we take a major storm with a surge to come along with it, it literally will wash across the islands that it hits.
The Florida Keys, as we know them, could essentially disappear, washed over by a monster storm surge that will leave little trace of civilization behind.
This is not a place you want to be if storm surge is coming.
Practically untouched by Hurricane Andrew's destructive force a quarter-century ago, the Keys has done well in avoiding killer storms as of late. But Monroe County Emergency Management Director Marty Centerfit knows that hasn't always been the case.
The 1935 hurricane that hit the Keys and a lot of people stayed behind. Unfortunately, they were finding bodies washed all the way onto all the islands, all the way up to the mainland. That's the worst case scenario, but it's happened. This isn't hypothetical. It has happened before. It can happen again.
Ignore that warning at your own risk. But remember, much of the island chain remains just as it was almost 100 years ago. One way in, one way out.
From a destruction perspective, water will be coming over US 1. And when that happens, we all know these roads will literally wash out. And then we have 42 bridges that connect the mainland to Key West. If we lose one of those bridges, as they did in 1960 Hurricane Donna, we become a true island community.
And once the storm passes, things will get much worse before they get better.
The Florida Keys is a land of bridges. And if we lose a bridge, our only way in and out, what does life look like? Without the daily trucks coming in from the mainland, bringing fuel, food, supplies, this becomes a very rough place to be.
It's estimated that if a massive hurricane should hit the Keys, it could take up to 6 months before bridges are fully repaired to allow normal traffic to flow back onto the islands.
The right thing to do, the smart thing to do, is just simply leave when you're ordered to leave and understand that, you know, you may have to live in the mainland for a little while as we restore the infrastructure here.
So how do you get the normally laid-back, carefree citizens of the Conch Republic to heed the warnings, especially after they've been lucky for so long?
And for some of those that were here for Wilma, they're under the impression that Wilma was the real deal, that it was a big major storm. And sometimes it's difficult to explain that, you know, Wilma missed.
Well, as you can see, I'm pretty close to the water. Maybe, I don't know, 60 feet or so, 70 feet from the water.
Realtor and Keys resident Alicia Lozano is one who won't take any chances. She loves living in a tropical oasis, but knows better than to mess with Mother Nature.
If they say to evacuate in the Upper Keys in Key Largo, where I live, I'm out of here.
Trouble is, Lozano may be the exception rather than the rule when it comes to Keys residents, many of whom would rather ride out the storm and begin repairs immediately after a devastating hurricane passes.
My response is, with what? The Home Depots are closed, there are no trucks coming in, there's no electricity, there's no running water. What are you going to repair with?
More than anywhere else in South Florida, the Keys could become ground zero for hurricane devastation that could take months, if not years, to recover from. But simple common sense and a solid plan could save lives should our worst fears come true.
We live in a tropical paradise, and part of that cost of living in a paradise is every few years we're going to be inconvenienced and have to evacuate. Just take ownership of that and know that it's part of the price you pay for living in just perfect climates.
History is a great teacher, Max.
That's right. You can look back at the Great Miami Hurricane of 1926 or the Labor Day Hurricane in the Florida Keys in 1935. Both of those hurricanes had significant loss of life from the storm surge.
We'll be right back.
Coming up, find out why U.S. and Cuban politicians should take a cue from the weather experts when it comes to international relations. That and more when Local 10's Staying Storm Safe returns.
For South Floridians, boating is a way of life. That's why you need to think ahead when it comes to your boat. First, do you know where you'll keep your boat if a hurricane approaches? At home or at a marina? Make sure you leave plenty of time to secure your boat. And remember, drawbridges in South Florida will be locked down up to 36 hours before a storm strikes. So make sure you're not trapped. Most importantly, never ever attempt to ride out a hurricane in your boat.
Welcome back to Staying Storm Safe. New relations between the U.S. and Cuba have opened many doors.
Well, the relationship between the two countries' weather experts has been strong for decades.
Our Hatzel Vela has more on the cooperation between the U.S. and Cuba.
Meet Jose Rubiera, the man the expert Cubans have been relying on for decades during hurricane season.
Well, a long time.
Meteorology in Cuba goes back to the 1800s. More precisely, in 1870, when the Jesuit priest Benito Viñez starts running the observatory at the Royal College of Belen.
He issued, on September the 12th, 1875, the first hurricane warner ever.
And when it comes to meteorology, the United States and Cuba have been cooperating since the Spanish-American War. That relationship continued through the Second World War.
Any nuclear missile launched from Cuba.
And even when both countries clashed and brought the world to a standstill.
I think that this relation never stopped.
Those bands going to keep...
Local 10's hurricane specialist Max Mayfield remembers a few hiccups even more recently.
When I became the director, we did not have, the United States did not have permission to fly military planes over Cuba. But that was our own State Department regulation. It was not, that did not come from Cuba.
That has now changed.
Deviation approved.
And U.S. military planes fly over or near Cuba for hurricane reconnaissance. It's a long-time relationship that has created long-time friendships.
I met Max Mayfield for the first time.
Rubiera and Mayfield have known each other for decades.
In fact, I have a picture of my friend Dr. Jose Rubiera at the Hurricane Center in about 1985.
In the case of Max, it's the hair.
He had hair.
Forgive me, Max.
Rubiera admits he too has aged. He's gray now. Both started as young meteorologists, never expecting both would end up being directors at their respective hurricane centers, or the Cuban National Forecast Center, as it is called here.
I used to jokingly say I got more Christmas cards from my friends in Cuba than I did from the Hurricane Center.
We have enjoyed a very beautiful friendship from all these years.
Rubiera recalls all those years working together, always remembers Mayfield for his calm demeanor.
When Max is on TV,
also a chance to smile.
Translates the calmness.
Two faces here in Cuba and back in South Florida, recognized for their expertise on hurricanes, but really for their ability to connect with their respective people. I'm Hatzo Vela, Local 10 News, Havana.
Tropical systems that hit Cuba often hit Florida, so communicating with that nation is really important, Max.
It is, and you can't make a forecast unless you have observations. And the Cuban hurricane forecasters obviously understand how important the United States Hurricane Hunter flights are. They've been really good about giving us permission to fly over and near Cuba. The United States obviously benefits from the radars and the surface observations from Cuba, so both countries benefit.
All right, well, we're almost done, but not yet. Still a few more things we want to share with you on staying storm safe, so stay right there.
Once a storm passes, the danger only increases, especially if you use a generator. Before hurricane season starts, make sure your generator is filled with fresh gas and give it a start to make sure it's operating properly. Before plugging in any appliances, let your generator run for several minutes. And never ever run a generator inside your home or any other enclosed location. For more tips on what to do after a storm, download the Local 10 Hurricane Survival Guide today on local10.com.
Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you learned something tonight, and we hope you're ready to head out and get everything you need to stay storm safe.
And remember, it only takes one hurricane over our community to make for a bad year. You need to know your vulnerability to all the hazards of the hurricane.
The Local 10 weather team always here for you, and if you're not near a television, there are many ways you can stay connected to Local 10. Local 10 has you covered in every way possible and whenever you need us. It's as easy as bookmarking local10.com as your one-stop online home for the latest hurricane updates as well as our up-to-the-second radar. And if you're on the go, you can put us in the palm of your hand by downloading both the Local 10 weather app and the Max Tracker Hurricane app for 24/7 information. And of course, follow us on Facebook and Twitter to be ready for whatever Mother Nature throws our way. So no excuses. Max, we hope everyone out there is ready for the hurricane season. We thank you so much for joining us for Staying Storm Safe. For Max Mayfield and the entire weather team, I'm Betty Davis. Have a good night.